Nice enough to join us, and he's nice enough to come all the time. He's Senator Roy Blunt from the state of Missouri here in studio. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Hey, good to be with you. I was a little behind picking up my mail, so I wanted to come by today and be sure it was...
People joke, but you are on the show so often, and it's nice to see a politician come on so many times. You get a chance to answer questions, and you take all questions, all comers, all times, right? I mean, that's how you were taught.
Well, it kind of depends on the question. Now that this sounds like a setup. This sounds like a setup to me. Now what I'd like to know is...
All right, Senator, now that you're here. First, over the weekend, bipartisan support, bicameral support for this sanctions bill. Tell us what's in this bill.
Well, I'm for the sanctions bill, and the sanctions bill, not just Russian activity here, but Russian activity in Crimea, Russian activity in Ukraine, totally unacceptable. And I think the Congress spoke pretty clearly on this, 98-2 in the Senate,
right.
Going back really to the act when we did develop a trade relationship with Russia. It caveated that some of these really truly bad people can't be part of our activities with the United States, and they still continue to do things that are unacceptable in Syria, in Crimea, in Ukraine, and here. And I think this is a good response.
The president has signaled this morning that he's probably likely to sign it, but how close was he working with you guys? It seemed like there was a little bit of a rub between what he wanted and what came out of the...
Well, no president ever wants to be told what they have to do in foreign policy. And I think that we'd gotten too far down the path of creating too many options for presidents. President Obama always wanted the options. President Bush always wanted the options. Of course, if you're president, why wouldn't you want more ways to have flexibility as to whether you did this or not? But I think that's the job of the Congress, particularly in a moment like this, to speak strongly
right.
to people who are doing bad things all over the world. And the Russians are what the Russians did in Crimea, nothing like that has happened since right after World War II. And the fact that we did nothing, the NATO did nothing, we let them just take a part of it, and then they're clearly aggressively in Ukraine. They're messing with elections here in Germany and
right.
France. In Montenegro, tried to overthrow the government before they could join NATO. A little bit of a pushback here is appropriate.
Are you in favor of us not arming the rebels in Syria? It seems to be that's a departure in the Trump administration from the Obama administration. And John McCain, while on his hospital bed, was tweeting about how that was a bad move. What do you say?
Well, I actually know quite a bit about that from the Intel Committee, and we've been monitoring that and how effective it was, and it could have been more effective. In terms of arming people, whether it's Ukraine with particularly defensive weapons or in Syria, if you've got a group you should be supporting, I think we'll continue to do that. What we really ought to do, though, is create an environment in the air to where those groups have a chance on the ground.
All right, let's talk closer to home. The health care bill you're going back to vote on tomorrow. What are you going to be voting on?
Well, the first thing we'll vote on is whether to get on this topic and have a wide open debate on health care. That's still in question, I think. If somehow that doesn't work, we'll go back to the normal committee process with an incredibly well-informed Senate in terms of understanding the intricacies of health care. If it does work, then we'll vote on everything anybody wants to vote on. We could vote on repeal, we could vote on replace, we could vote on every variation of that. This is one of those Wild West kind of rules in the Senate to where you actually have something that actually we call it vote-a-rama, which means you vote as long as anybody has an amendment they want to offer that really relates to the bill. And so if we get on the bill, we'll probably vote on all the options.
So explain to me, tomorrow, I thought that last we left this on Friday, it was going to be a vote up or down to repeal Obamacare in and of itself.
Well, that's not technically what the first vote is. The first vote is a vote to take up the House bill.
Okay.
And that'll be the vote. But everybody can see that vote however they want to. You can say, okay, wasn't really one about the House bill. I just didn't think we were ready yet for the bigger debate. Probably the really important thing to watch is what the majority leader, Senator McConnell, who has the First Amendment, what he says, if we take the bill up, the First Amendment will be this. repeal would be one option, what we voted on before, or more of a replacement. But at the end of the day, if we take the bill up, the likelihood is we'll vote on all of those things.
I know this is inside baseball, but it's really kind of interesting, and that was the Senate parliamentarian said that there were certain things in the Republican health care bill that needed 60 votes. It's the first time where I heard the parliamentarian getting into the weeds as over what you guys can and can't vote. It seems like you're now arguing over the rules in a sense.
Well, in many ways, the parliamentarian does that all the time, but it's on smaller issues.
Right.
And this is one of those procedural votes where by trying to do this with 51 votes, you do it as part of the budget process. So it has to be more about spending than policy. And so what the parliamentarian gets to decide is, well, no, that's actually an amendment that would be more about policy than spending. So it takes the normal 60 votes to add it to the bill. But if it's sometimes you can just rewrite it in a new way so that it truly is more of a spending thing. This is trying to push a string in many ways. You're trying to take an opportunity to do something with fewer votes than you would normally take, but that comes with lots of handcuffs and restrictions, and the parliamentarian decides when those handcuffs come on and when they go off.
I don't want to weaponize health care because it is toxic. People get angry, people get defensive, people stand their ground. But where it seems like Republicans don't have enough votes in the Senate and the House to get what they want done. Democrats clearly don't have the votes to get what they want done. So where do we go from here when it comes to this health care debate?
Well, if it turns out that we don't have enough votes, if 50 senators and the vice president, which is anticipated will take his vote, 50 senators and the vice president don't decide to get on the House bill and have a wide open amendment process, then the real alternative is to go back to the normal committee structure, start again with whatever bill that the chairman and that committee wants to start with, and go through that process. I think that process is almost always the best process because you get to test your ideas. You know, one of the problems of not going through that process is you've got a really great idea and you think everybody should accept it, but there's never that moment when you find out of the 20 of you on the committee, only 2 other people think this is really worth pursuing.
Right.
So get back to that process, and then it would take Republicans and Democrats to try to do something that impacts everybody's health care. Now, the current system is clearly not working. And we have 97 counties in our state out of 114 counties in the city of St. Louis. We have 97 counties where only one insurance company is willing to offer a policy on the exchange. So is that really a marketplace or not? Surely not.
The argument that I get on the show is health care is too expensive. My premiums are too high, and then my deductible is really too high.
Right.
And so the argument isn't less, it seems like, or what we're hearing from this bill is that it would seems like our premiums might go down, but our health care coverage will go down equally. So what's the point of buying health insurance if it's not there when you need it?
Well, you're right. That's, and I think we've gotten all of our discussion here confused with the target of everybody having insurance to whether everybody has access. If your deductible's too high, if the policy's too high to start with, you're just suffering as a family. You're not really having insurance. It's like you have a ticket on the bus, but no bus is coming.
Right.
You're into Medicaid, but no doctor wants to take new Medicaid patients. You've got other insurance, but you've got a $6,000 deductible. And in in the policy most often sold in our state, you have a $6,000 deductible, and if 2 people in your family are sick, you have to meet that deductible twice. Mm-hmm. So, McGraw, you're paying $1,000 a month. You got another $12,000 before your insurance company really comes in and steps in. Is that, for most families, that is not insurance. That's just a penalty that many people decide they can't afford to pay, particularly as long as the actual penalty is either not enforced or so small that it's better to pay the penalty than to have insurance that doesn't do you any good.
Then what happens to the person who says, I can't afford it, I'm not paying for it at all, and then is diagnosed with something terrible, right? Then that person goes to the hospital, gets worse insurance, but has never been paying into the system to begin with.
Yeah. Well, there's, one of the ways this was structured where pre-existing conditions are covered.
Right.
Unless it's an emergency pre-existing condition, you can usually wait now until the next time to sign up for the very best insurance you can get,
right?
Knowing that you've got lots of expenses in front of you. And of course, that distorts everybody else's insurance market because you're doing that. Healthcare is a challenge. As somebody told me one time, when everybody in your family is well, you've got lots of problems. When somebody is sick, you've got one problem. And so when the federal government decides it's going to insert itself without thinking of all the ramifications into everybody's health care, you've inserted yourself into something that every single family identifies with. This is not trade policy or tax policy. This is the health care for your family and access to health care. We've got, I think, have more choices, more access, more competition. Hopefully we'll be able to work together and find out how to do that.
The other thing, too, is American people have to realize that health insurance is expensive. And, if you want, unlimited data on your phone, you're going to have to pay for it. If you want the world's greatest doctors and the world's greatest health care and be taking care of everything and the gold-plated health insurance, you're going to have to pay for it.
Well, you are, though. The way the current system is set up and any alternatives are being talked about right now, if you can't afford to pay for it, taxpayers pay for an awful lot of it. And if that's going to happen, you want to be sure that you're giving people access to not just insurance, but access to health care.
Take a minute or two. Senator Blunt is our guest. Couple more minutes. As much as you can tell us, what is going on in Washington, D.C. with Donald Trump and the tweets and the conversations, and what is going on?
Well, people wanted something different when they voted for the president, and they got something different. He doesn't do this like anybody else has ever done it. And there's a lot of sort of daily focus on what he decides he wants to talk about that day. But I will tell you, there's also a lot happening that people where you and I live would want to happen. The regulators are being pushed back into the legal ramification, the legal structure they should be in. Something you and I have talked about dozens of times, the power rule that would have doubled our utility bill in Missouri in 10 or 12 years, that's gone. The waters of the U.S. rule where 99.7% of our state for any building permit, resurfacing your driveway, digging a utility pole hole, that's gone. So a lot of regulations are being put back where they should be. In fact, both of those two terrible regulations for Missouri never went into effect to start with because the courts said, you really don't have the authority to do this, EPA. And now you've got a president and an EPA director that says, yeah, you're right, we don't have the authority to do that. The EPA director, by the way, is also focused and promised on Westlake after 25 years or so of dealing with that to come up with a plan. And he made the very good point. Is this a priority or not? Something can't be a priority and not be dealt with for 2.5 decades. He said, this is the job of the EPA, not raising people's utility bills, but taking care of things where you need environmental protection.
The criticism is that with the circus going on with Donald Trump, and I don't mean that negative or positive, but we can all agree it's fun to watch. Get your tub of popcorn because it sure is fun to watch. With all of that going on and all the Russia conversation, that the Republicans are missing a once-in-a-generation opportunity to change the tax policy and to change the way some of these entitlements are funded. Your response to that?
Well, that's why I think it's time to move on with health care, either to do what we have the votes to do or go back and start again and get this going through a different process and get on to things like transportation policy, very important where we live. One of our critical advantages in Missouri is transportation, tax policy. And I'd say if there's any significant loss in the last 6 months, it's not getting to those issues sooner, because the best time for an administration to get things done is always, at least it traditionally has always been, in the first 6 or 7 months. And so while we get to those, and I'm going to work hard to be sure that they help us grow our economy, we're probably not going to have quite as big a change in either of those areas as we might have had if we'd have been started.
They say you have to change health care to get to the tax policy. Do you agree with that?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right, fair enough. Last minute here. Josh Holley, rumored to be running for United States Senate. Any comments? Talk to him. Anything? Any light you can shed on that?
Yeah, no, not really. He's a capable guy, and he's doing good things in the Attorney General's office, and we'll just have to see what he decides.
What are you reading?
I just read a book on called Engineering Eden, which was about trying to transition the National Park Service, particularly Yellowstone, back to where much more of an environment where it's self-balancing. And it was pretty interesting. You know, for a long time in Yellowstone, they just fed the bears,
right,
whatever was left over from all of the restaurants and cafes. And the bears stopped figuring out how to eat anything else.
Right.
And when they stopped feeding the bears, they decided maybe a person or two here and there was not a bad alternative, and not funny for their families. But
Right,
and
right.
it was so Engineering Eden, and it was my daughter, who's a lawyer in Columbia. It was about a legal case where the park should have done more, according to one of the courts, but that was pretty good.
This is the daughter you would not have voted for the Supreme Court. Is this the same daughter?
That is, she would have been a credit to the court, but
Not that time.
Not if she'd have been the Obama nominee in the last year of the presidency. But I'm actually. It's not good that you brought that back up, by the way.
That's tough for a Sunday night. Tell us one thing we don't know that's not getting through from Washington that we should know.
The Missouri is part of a 8-state pilot where we'll be treating mental health at 15 different locations that serve this pretty much the whole population of the state. Mental health like all other health for 2 years, and see what happens when you do the right thing, treating behavioral health like all other health.
Senator Roy Blunt, you're always welcome here. Safe travels, and thanks for coming in.
Great to see you.
9:26.